you guys, you've got your own EV center of excellence in Shanghai covering integrated end-to-end logistics for EV products. This includes, I think, but please correct me if I'm wrong, it includes batteries, electric motors, charging infrastructure. Um, China's a real leader on EV technology. For people who haven't been to China recently, can you explain just how advanced take up of this tech is and what the supply chains are like behind them?
Absolutely. So this is potentially one of the most exciting things that are happening in the Chinese market right now. Um, so I don't know if many people know, but China only got into EV manufacturing in 2020, and today is the largest market for EV in the world. So China's EV and like plug-in hybrid sales hit an all-time high of about 11 million units in 2024, which cements its position as the number one world's largest EV market. It also operates the largest EV charging network in the world. And just in the middle of last year, in the middle of 2024, there were over 10 million stations across China, which, if you look at a year on year increase just for half that year, was about 56% year on year increase. So China also produces over 75% of the global EV batteries. So this makes China a clear leader in the market if you look at the vehicles or batteries or charging components. For me, what's also fascinating is pre-COVID, you potentially did not see a green license plate, the green license plates or the EV cars. Now, if you drive in Shanghai, you see about 40% of the vehicles on the road have a green license plate. It's changed the smog levels in China, but also for me, when you live in a big city, the noise pollution goes down with more EV vehicles on the street. So I think it helps not just business, but also overall sustainability and lifestyle and living.
And presumably these supply chains are really very integrated both on that inbound side. So I guess this is intra China inbound supply chains across those different EV products. And then it's also a big export as well, as you mentioned.
That's right. That's right. It's both, of course, it's largest, the largest consumption of the sales has been domestic, but you see all these, whether it's the finished vehicles or the batteries going up, you see that export is also taking off quite a bit in the last few years. And, Mike, if you put that into perspective, right, and you look at the traditional low cost manufacturing, or you look at how large the tech manufacturing in China used to be, and let's take an example. If you think about tech and the number of laptops that could fit into a container, so let's say on average, depending on the size of the packaging, etc., you could get 5,000 laptops into a container. You can get about 3 or 4 cars at max into a container. So think about a household, how many laptops you use, how many cars you use, and what that does to actual capacity or containerized capacity for volume. So whilst you can say certain sectors, are, manufacturing in different countries of the world, China is manufacturing a different sort of production now. So batteries take up more space in a container than a laptop does. So we saw that export growth last year out of China was about 11%. So you see the supply chains evolving very differently in what that does to the overall container capacity.
Yeah, interesting comparison between batteries and laptops because we always have this thing in freight where people talk about everything getting smaller, but then new products come along and they are bigger than the ones that used to drive volumes in some cases. What other verticals are you really looking to grow in China then, Aditi?
So, of course, we will continue to do our traditional sectors, but you'll see a big focus for us on e-commerce, renewables, electric vehicles, but also solar, wind energy, green hydrogen, what that does. We will focus a lot on technology, sustainability, and innovation-driven development sectors, which look very promising with AI and robotics and how that plays in. And of course, e-commerce will continue to be a big driver as well as life science and healthcare, which we're investing quite heavily in.
The manufacturing in China, I think this is of particular relevance when we hear so much about bringing manufacturing home and reshoring. People
Mhm.
talk about the demographic challenges facing China. It's an aging population, rising labor costs, these things to combine into to threaten its ability to be the factory of the world, which it's been for the last 20 odd years. We've discussed this previously about how China's building these huge advantages in robotics, in automation, and in other technologies that maybe might be able to help it maintain its advantage against other possible producers around the world in the future. Can you explain a little bit more, or maybe give us some examples of that in practice?
Sure. I mean, Mike, let's be fair. China is not the only country in the world to face an aging population. I think what China has done, though, it's put a plan in place to address this. So starting back in 2021, China was already installing as many robots in factories per year as the rest of the world combined. In 2022, the government released a 5-year plan to be the leader in industrial automation. Now, 2023, they released further guidelines for an action plan for implementing robotics plus application. And this was to accelerate the use of robotics in a variety of range of sectors, be it manufacturing, agricultural, logistics, energy, healthcare, education, and even aged care services. And last year, China took the top spot for robot density, overtaking Germany and Japan. And this is with having about 470 robots per 1,000 employees. And this now takes us away from low cost manufacturing into that evolved industrial automation powerhouse. And I want to give you an example of a customer I visited a few months ago. And this is a large solar manufacturing site, one of the big guys. And now they're in the top 5 in the world, largest solar companies. And this is just one of their sites. And they've now, keep in mind, got multiple sites. So this site is completely net carbon zero, carbon neutral. It produces volumes for about 120,000 containers a year. So this is just one site, right? One site produces 120,000 containers a
Wow.
year. And it's managed more or less with automation with just 27 employees. 27 employees for 120,000 containers for this factory annually. And that's the level of automation that we're at, right? I hadn't seen these panels are heavy and you watch them being manufactured by these machines move around the belt, but also then come down this conveyor belt and completely automated and move into a container without a person moving a forklift or driving a forklift in order for them to get there. And that's kind of fascinating to watch if you've been in this industry as long as, over 20 years or so, you haven't seen that level of automation come in. So I think that's quite fascinating.
How do I mean, that creates questions about how other producers will compete with that type of, integrated, automated supply chain, and ability to produce. I mean, 120,000 TEU with that level of personnel, is quite amazing. DHL produced a white paper called China Plus X earlier this year, and this is all about moving beyond China Plus One to multi-shoring strategies that build production, build supplier diversity, and supply chain resilience. The idea of China Plus One, of course, came from the geopolitical risk to producing just in China. That came from the first Trump administration, when we saw these tariffs on China, and producers were encouraged to find alternatives. So we saw Mexico, we saw Vietnam and India attract a lot of new business. Obviously, these countries are also now subject to these stinging tariffs. But how do you build resilience in this environment? And is China plus X, this multi-shoring, is that still a viable strategy, would you say?
Okay, so, not that I'm biased, Mike, but I would say, next China will still be China. But having said that, I think supply chain diversification will continue because companies prioritize resilience, right? These decisions require years of planning, meaning changes won't happen overnight. So while tariffs are significant, there is just one part of the regulatory environment. So companies must evaluate overall total business costs, workforce skill levels, transportation infrastructure, and a country's overall physical and digital infrastructure. So, initiating these changes requires large investments. And we don't believe all companies will reverse strategies immediately. In fact, we see more companies thinking about how they make their supply chains more resilient and less dependent on tariffs, or less dependent on a single sourcing country, right? So resilience is the key, and people will look at strategies to make sure that they're not handicapped in any form. Multi-shoring will continue to be a viable strategy just to make sure you are resilient with all the changes, be it regulatory, tariffs, COVID. You're just making your supply chain more resilient.
And please do check out my explainer, because I do talk about some of those countries that might be possible options if you're looking at tariff workarounds. They included low tariff countries, actually, like Brazil, but Northern Ireland's also quite an interesting option. There's a few others out there. So I just on that point, Aditi, if I may, this talk about US manufacturing being reshored. What you're talking about, the latest tech in China for the sort of industries that the US might want to create jobs in, it's going to be highly automated if you're bringing best practice in anyway, presumably.
Yes, I mean, I think if you partner with the right technology, robotic companies, etc., there's a lot of that can be automated. And I think the level to which you do that is what creates efficiency in your overall business. That reduces costs. It brings about higher efficiency. So I think organizations need to consider that when you think about your overall strategy of where you want to manufacture. You want to look at the overall effectiveness of the supply chain.
Yeah, and you know what type of jobs you will create with this, because there's not this old um
Absolutely.
conveyor belt type. That's not even the case in, it might be the case in textiles in Cambodia, but it's not the case when you're talking about EVs in China. If that's the type of high tech business you want to reshore, whether that's Europe, whether that's the US, it doesn't really matter.
That's right. And you need to look at the type of jobs that it's generating. You also need to look at where you're sourcing from and what that manufacturing location means to you for the overall cost of bringing those components in, right? So it's multiple pieces that you need to consider when you look at this.